Someone typed one simple question into Grok AI. Why did Neanderthals really go extinct? And the answer that came back was so unsettling that it made scientists rethink everything they thought they knew about our ancient cousins. For decades, we were taught a simple story. Neanderthals were dumb. They were slow. They lost a fair fight to smarter humans. But that story is falling apart right now, and what is replacing it is far stranger than fiction. For over 100 years, Neanderthals have been painted as the losers of human history. Brutish, hairy, slow-witted cavemen who simply could not keep up with clever Homo sapiens. That image stuck in textbooks, in movies and cartoons, but here's the twist nobody tells you. Neanderthals survived in Europe and Asia for over 400,000 years. That is not a failure. That is one of the most successful survival stories in the history of our planet. So the real mystery is not why they were weak. The real mystery is why a species that dominated for 400,000 years suddenly vanished in the blink of an evolutionary eye. When modern humans arrived in Europe around 45,000 years ago, something changed fast. Within just 5,000 years, every single Neanderthal on Earth was gone. 5,000 years sounds like a long time to us, but on the scale of evolution, that is barely a heartbeat. Something hit them hard, and it hit them everywhere at once. This is exactly the kind of pattern that made researchers turn to artificial intelligence for a fresh perspective, feeding it the latest genetic data, climate records, and archaeological findings, hoping for a pattern human eyes had missed. The first theory people usually hear is competition. The idea that humans and Neanderthals fought over the same food, the same caves, the same hunting grounds, and humans simply won. But newer research complicates that picture. Scientists studying ancient sites have found that Neanderthals were skilled hunters. They made sophisticated stone tools. They used fire. They even crafted weapons and scrapers with real precision. This was not a species that lost because it was primitive. If anything, the tools tell a story of intelligence that rivaled early humans in many ways. So if brute competition was not the whole answer, scientists look deeper into biology itself, and this is where things get disturbing. Recent genetic studies have uncovered something called a genetic bottleneck. This happened over 100,000 years before Neanderthals disappeared completely. A genetic bottleneck means a population's diversity collapses dramatically, almost like the gene pool gets squeezed through a narrow tube. Researchers analyzed fossil inner ear structures, which act like a hidden fingerprint of genetic health, and found strong evidence that Neanderthal populations had already been struggling internally long before humans even arrived on the scene. Now here is where the story gets even more uncomfortable. Some Neanderthal remains discovered in caves in southern France revealed something startling. These individuals were highly inbred, not just distantly related, but closely, repeatedly, generation after generation. Researchers explained that reduced genetic diversity like this can quietly weaken a population over time. It does not kill you instantly. It just makes every future challenge a little bit harder to survive. Imagine an entire species slowly losing its ability to adapt, one generation at a time, without even realizing it. But then a completely different study challenged that assumption. Scientists analyzed DNA from 27 Neanderthals, individuals found across 10 different sites in Northwestern Europe, right before the species vanished. What they found was surprising. These particular Neanderthals were actually genetically diverse. They showed no clear signs of the kind of severe inbreeding that had been blamed before. This suggests something even more chilling. Maybe different Neanderthal groups across the continent were dying out for completely different reasons at the same time. Not one single villain, but multiple crises hitting simultaneously. If you are enjoying uncovering these hidden layers of ancient history, do not forget to hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps this channel keep bringing you deep dives like this one. So if genetics alone cannot explain everything, what else was happening? This is where climate enters the picture. Scientists have documented a brutal 1,000-year-long cold snap in Central Europe that lined up almost perfectly with the timing of Neanderthal extinction. Neanderthals were incredibly specialized for icy conditions. Their bodies, their hunting style, their diet, all of it was built around large Ice Age animals. But specialization is a double-edged sword. When the climate shifted and those massive animals began disappearing, Neanderthals had far fewer options to fall back on. Homo sapiens, on the other hand, were more flexible eaters and had wider trade networks stretching across long distances, which meant that when one food source vanished, they simply had other options waiting. This idea of networks turns out to be one of the most powerful explanations to come out of recent research. A groundbreaking new study suggests the real difference between humans and Neanderthals was not intelligence or strength at all. It was social connection. Homo sapiens formed large, flexible, overlapping social networks that stretched across huge distances. If one group faced a disaster, they could lean on distant allies for support, resources, or even new mates. Neanderthals had social connections too, but they were smaller, more fragile, and far more isolated geographically. When environmental shocks hit, Human networks bent without breaking. Neanderthal networks simply snapped. Think about that for a moment. It was not about who could throw a spear harder or run faster. It was about who had more friends scattered across the map when disaster struck. In a strange way, the ancient world rewarded the same thing that matters in our world today, which is community, connection, and the ability to reach beyond your own small circle for help. Isolation, even back then, could be a death sentence. But researchers were not finished. In fact, one of the boldest new theories has nothing to do with food, tools, or even other humans. It comes from outer space. A team led by a space physicist proposed that Neanderthals may have gone extinct for astrophysical reasons. Around 41,000 years ago, Earth experienced something called the Lachamp event, a dramatic and temporary flip of the planet's magnetic poles. During this event, Earth's protective magnetic shield weakened dramatically. That shield normally blocks harmful cosmic and ultraviolet radiation from bombarding the surface. When that shield weakened, radiation levels on Earth's surface likely spiked. Auroras that are normally confined to the poles may have danced across the entire sky, visible from nearly anywhere on the planet. It probably looked beautiful and terrifying at the same time. But beneath that light show, increased radiation exposure could have caused serious health problems, skin damage, and even disruptions to ecosystems that Neanderthals depended on for survival. It is a wild idea, cosmic forces reaching down from space and quietly tipping the balance of an entire species' fate. But the data lines up close enough that scientists are taking it seriously. Now imagine feeding all of this into an artificial intelligence model. The genetic bottlenecks, the inbreeding evidence, the climate collapse, the fragile social networks, the magnetic pole flip. That is essentially what happened when researchers and curious users began asking systems like Grok to analyze the full picture instead of just one narrow theory at a time. And what emerged was not a single dramatic villain, it was something far more haunting. Neanderthals were not wiped out by one single catastrophic event. They were slowly squeezed from every direction at once. Picture it like this. Imagine a small, tightly knit family that already has fewer people than it used to. Then a brutal winter arrives that lasts for centuries. Then the animals they depend on for food start disappearing. Then radiation levels spike because of a wandering magnetic pole. Then, on top of everything else, a new, more adaptable species with wider social networks and better resource sharing moves into the same territory. No single one of those problems would have destroyed Neanderthals on its own, but all of them arriving at nearly the same time created a perfect storm that no group, no matter how strong or skilled, could fully withstand. This is the uncomfortable truth that keeps surfacing across multiple independent studies. Extinction is rarely about one dramatic moment. It is usually about many small vulnerabilities stacking on top of each other until the whole structure collapses. Neanderthals were not defeated in some epic battle. They were slowly worn down by biology, climate, isolation, and possibly even cosmic radiation, all converging at once. And there is one more twist that makes this story even more personal. Neanderthals did not completely disappear. Genetic research has confirmed that early Homo sapiens and Neanderthals interbred. Many people alive today, especially those with ancestry outside of Africa, carry small fragments of Neanderthal DNA inside their own genome. In a very real sense, Neanderthals never fully vanished. They were absorbed. Their genes are still walking around today, hidden inside billions of modern humans who have no idea they are carrying a whisper of an ancient, extinct relative inside every single cell of their body. So when Grok AI was asked why Neanderthals really went extinct, the most striking part of the answer was not any single cause. It was the idea that we have been asking the wrong question this whole time. We keep searching for the one reason, the one villain, the one moment everything went wrong. But real extinction, at least according to the evidence piling up right now, almost never works that way. It is death by 1,000 small cuts. A weakened gene pool here, a vanishing food source there. A fractured social network unable to reach for help. A magnetic field that quietly stopped protecting the surface of the planet for a while. And finally, a new species arriving with better connections and more flexible tools for survival. What makes this even more fascinating is how much this mirrors challenges that still exist today. Isolated communities that lack strong support networks are often more vulnerable during crises. Species that specialize too narrowly struggle the most when their environment shifts. Even now, scientists studying modern extinction risks look at exactly these same factors: genetic diversity, environmental resilience, and social connectivity, to predict which species might be in danger next. In a strange way, the story of the Neanderthals is not just ancient history, it is a warning written in bone and DNA, still relevant tens of thousands of years later. There is also something deeply humbling about all of this. For so long, we assumed our ancestors won because they were simply better, smarter, stronger. But the deeper research goes, the more it looks like survival was never about superiority at all. It was about connection, adaptability, and a little bit of luck. at exactly the right moment in history. Neanderthals were not failures. They were survivors for hundreds of thousands of years, facing an avalanche of pressures that eventually became too much for even their remarkable resilience to overcome. If this kind of deep dive into ancient mysteries and cutting-edge research fascinates you, make sure you're subscribed, because there are so many more stories like this one waiting to be uncovered. Stories where science keeps rewriting what we thought we already understood. So the next time someone tells you Neanderthals simply lost to smarter humans, you will know the real story is far more complicated, far more tragic, and honestly far more fascinating. It was not a single defeat. It was climate change squeezing their food supply. It was genetics slowly narrowing their options across generations. It was isolation cutting them off from help when they needed it most. It was possibly even the planet's own magnetic field abandoning its post for a few thousand years at exactly the wrong time. And it was a new species arriving with wider networks and sharper adaptability, ready to fill the space left behind. Grok AI did not hand us one dramatic answer wrapped in a neat little bow. It handed us something more honest. A reminder that extinction, even for a species that thrived longer than modern humans have even existed so far, can creep in quietly from a dozen directions at once. Let us go back for a moment to those bones discovered in Belgium, because they hold one of the clearest windows we have ever had into a Neanderthal's actual life. Researchers managed to sequence a high-quality genome from a single individual who lived around 45,000 years ago, right before the final collapse. This was not a fragment or a partial sample. It was nearly the entire genetic code, reconstructed with startling accuracy. And what it revealed surprised almost everyone who studied it. This individual came from a population that still had meaningful genetic diversity. There were no obvious signs of severe recent inbreeding. That single genome quietly overturned an assumption that had been repeated in documentaries and textbooks for years. For a long time, the simplest explanation felt satisfying. Inbreeding weakened them and weakness killed them. It was tidy. It fit neatly into a narrative about decline. But real science rarely stays tidy for long. When researchers expanded their search to 27 different Neanderthal individuals spread across 10 separate sites in Northwestern Europe, the picture became far messier and far more interesting. Some groups clearly showed signs of genetic strain. Others looked surprisingly healthy right up until the moment they disappeared. This tells us something important. There was no single Neanderthal population experiencing one uniform decline. There were many different communities, scattered across a continent, each facing their own unique mix of pressures. That detail matters more than it might seem at first. If every Neanderthal group had died from the exact same cause, we would expect the genetic evidence to look consistent everywhere. Instead, it looks patchy, uneven, almost chaotic. Some groups were undone by isolation. Others may have been undone by climate stress. Others still might have simply been absorbed into expanding human populations. Through interbreeding, generation after generation, until there were no genetically distinct Neanderthals left at all. Extinction in this light starts to look less like a single event and more like a slow fading, community by community, valley by valley, across thousands of years. There's also a discovery that adds a darker layer to this story. Evidence uncovered at a cave in Belgium suggests that some Neanderthal groups may have turned on each other in moments of extreme desperation, with remains showing signs consistent with cannibalism directed at outsiders, including women and children from rival groups. As harsh as that sounds, it fits a grim but familiar pattern seen throughout nature. When resources become scarce enough, even closely related groups can turn against one another rather than cooperate. If true, this suggests that in their final chapters, some Neanderthal communities were not just battling the climate or competing with humans. They may have been fracturing from within, turning inward against their own kind during moments of unbearable scarcity. Now contrast that with what researchers have found about early Homo sapiens during the exact same period. Evidence of trade. Networks stretching across enormous distances suggest early humans were sharing resources, ideas, and even mates across regions that Neanderthals rarely crossed. When a local food source failed for one human group, there is reason to believe they could reach out to distant allies for support. This single difference, the ability to lean on people far outside your immediate valley or cave system, may have been the quiet advantage that tipped the entire balance of survival in favor of our species. There is something almost poetic about that idea. Two species living through the same brutal ice age winters, the same disappearing herds of prey, the same unpredictable climate swings, and yet one species survived largely because it built wider circles of trust and cooperation. It was not about muscles or brain power in the way old cartoons imagined it. It was about reach. How far could your support system stretch when everything around you started falling apart? Let us also sit with the astrophysical theory a little longer, because it deserves more attention than a passing mention. The Lasham event was not a myth or a fringe idea invented for headlines. It is a well-documented moment in Earth's geological history when the planet's magnetic poles briefly wandered and weakened before eventually settling back into their usual pattern. During that window, the magnetic field that normally shields every living thing on this planet from harmful radiation dropped, dramatically in strength. Some estimates suggest it fell to a small fraction of its normal intensity for a period of time. During that weakened window, cosmic rays and ultraviolet radiation from the sun could reach the surface with far less resistance than usual. Researchers studying this event have suggested it may have triggered increased skin damage, higher rates of certain health, complications, and possibly even disruptions to the ozone layer that protects living organisms from the harshest wavelengths of solar radiation. For a species already stretched thin by genetic bottlenecks, shrinking food supplies, and fragile social networks, an extra layer of environmental stress raining down from space could have been the tipping point that pushed already struggling communities over the edge. Of course, skepticism is healthy here, and many researchers remain cautious about how much weight to give this particular theory. Correlation in timing does not automatically prove causation. But what makes this idea worth taking seriously is how well it fits alongside the other pieces of evidence rather than standing alone. It is not being offered as the single cause of extinction. It is being offered as one more pressure, layered on top of everything else already working against Neanderthal survival at that exact moment in history. This is exactly the kind of layered, interconnected thinking that makes asking an AI system like Grok such an interesting exercise in the first place. Human researchers tend to specialize. A geneticist focuses on DNA. A climatologist focuses on ancient weather patterns. A space physicist focuses on magnetic fields and radiation. Each expert sees a piece of the puzzle clearly, but rarely do they sit in the same room comparing notes in real time. When you feed all of these different specialized findings into one system and ask them to look for overlapping patterns, you start to see connections that might otherwise stay hidden inside separate academic journals, published years apart, read by completely different audiences. And that is really the heart of why this question resonates with so many people today. We live in an era where we finally have the tools, genetic sequencing, climate modeling, and advanced pattern recognition to revisit one of the oldest mysteries in human history and actually make progress on it. For over a century, Neanderthal extinction was treated almost like folklore, a story we ice, accepted without truly understanding. Now, piece by piece, that folklore is being replaced with something far more precise, even if the full picture remains frustratingly complex. Perhaps the most important lesson buried inside all of this research is not really about Neanderthals at all. It is about how fragile, even a wildly successful species, can become when enough pressures stack up at the same time. 400,000 years of survival sounds unbeatable, almost invincible, right up until it is not. Nature does not care how long you have already survived. It only cares whether you can keep adapting to whatever comes next. Genetic diversity, environmental flexibility, and above all, strong wide-reaching. Social connections seem to matter more than raw strength or even raw intelligence when it comes to long-term survival.